Hi, I'm Xenia, and welcome to my blanket fort. I'm reading excerpts from my books, and today I'm doing my favorite scene from The Ghost of Midormere. For just a smidgen of context, the character Oria was raised in a faith that abhors magic, and she's visiting a mage. Oria, Day 58 of Waking, 9:20. What began as concrete resolve flaked away with every step until Oria stood at the top of the long spiral staircase with only unsure hope. The wizard's door looked the same as ever, white paint and dark whorls of wood. The uneasy chord the tower struck in Oria's heart rang loud and clear. Palms slick with sweat, Oria laid her hand flat against the surface of the door, not able to bring herself to knock. She hated this. Just standing here without her cousins was difficult. To throw everything the church taught her about the dangers of magic to the wind, and to do so without another soul for company, made her stomach flip. Maybe she should have just gone to the church, talked with Liz, or one of the healers. But no. They were all honor-bound to tell her father everything she said, and it would be unfair to ask them to ignore their duty. That, and Lodge seemed to know regardless of being told. So what would stop him from knowing here? Probably nothing. This was a bad idea. Oria took her hand away from the door and began to slink back the way she had come. She took her time, drifting from step to step, arguing with herself the whole way. She wasn't sure how far she'd gotten when she heard the voice. Damn stairs! Why did I put in so many? It was Idah's voice, panting and puffing and speaking under her breath. The tap-tap of her walking stick echoed up the stairs, pinning Oria between the Grand Master and her front door. There were no alcoves to hide in, no open windows to perch in, nothing to keep her out of the wizard's one and only path. Oria? Idah asked, spotting her as she rounded the never-ending curve of the staircase. I hope you and the boys brought something good. It's been a long day for an old lady. Oria's eyes widened like an elk in a hunter's sights. She considered running past the wizard, but the space was too narrow to do so without shoving. Oria did not want to think about the sound the old lady would make crumpling down the stairs. Actually no, Oria answered, face flushing. Erskine and Sindrin aren't here, and I forgot to bring anything. She should have thought of that. They always brought Idah something. Idah leant on her stick, probing the gap of a missing tooth with her tongue. Her brow furrowed as she inspected Oria, and her elbows flared out, blocking any escape. Her expression darkened. You came alone? Oria nodded, unable to meet the wizard's eyes. Instead, she focused on her foot, tracing the tattoo symbol for coward into the floor. She imagined the same shape burning into her from shame. I changed my mind, though. I was just leaving. Oria stammered, eyeing up the tiny space left between Idah and the wall. She'd never fit without sending the old woman off balance. Oh, no, you don't, Idah scolded, prodding Oria around and marching up the stairs, overrunning Oria in her fearsome wake. If you of all people came to visit, then something must have happened. You're not going anywhere until we've had a little chat. Oria dragged her heels as Idah pushed her up the stairs. The old woman seemed reinvigorated, still breathing hard, but with a determined set to her jaw and sparkling eyes. When she closed the door to her tower behind them, Idah locked it, mumbling an enchantment across its surface for good measure. The only escape route locked, Oria fidgeted, regretting every step that brought her here. Idah didn't look at her as she set to work making tea. They waited in silence as the water boiled. Oria trying to look nonchalant and Idah scrutinizing her openly. When the smell of roses wafted from the teapot, mingling with old perfume, Idah finally creaked into her armchair and gestured for Oria to sit on the footstool. Oria obeyed, but didn't settle, back on her feet and pacing before Idah had finished pouring the tea. She couldn't help it. She was wound so tight with extra energy that she wondered why she didn't simply break in two under the strain. Why did you come, Oria? Idah asked, concern creeping into the question. I'd rather not say. I think coming here might have been a mistake.
Why?
Idah leaned forward, her teacup rattling slightly. Oria shuffled her feet, licking her lips. She would have to measure out how much truth to tell, find a way to get the information she wanted without getting Idah involved. I'm concerned that we might be overheard, she said at length.
Overheard?
Puzzlement ghosted over Idah's face as she glanced to the windows, far above the courtyards and many stories above the next highest floor, to the door, thick oak and locked. Some mechanism clicked behind her eyes and her expression softened into understanding. The wizard replaced her teacup on its saucer and rose, shuffling to her armoire and rummaging through one of the drawers. As she moved, Oria's dread grew. Fear knotted her muscles, telling her to flee, and disgust rose like bile in her throat that she'd thought to come here in the first place. But she was stuck between the wizard and an enchanted door. When Idah returned, it was with a serious expression and a small silver ring. A blue gem sat atop it, shaped like an eye and winking up at her in the light. It was simple by noble standards. Put this on, and no one will be able to detect you save with their own eyes and ears, Idah whispered, standing so close to Oria that she could smell roses on the wizard's breath. It sounded too good to be true, and Oria's heart beat faster as she studied the flashing silver. The foreboding feeling, the strangling beliefs ingrained on her heart, were stifling as she looked at it. It was like a force, pushing back against her hand as she reached for the jewelry, warning her. But more frightening was the idea of never being able to talk to anyone about what was happening, to never find an outlet for her hope. The ring was cool beneath her fingers, heavy, but otherwise just as any other ring. Oria staggered, gasping when she slipped it on, the sheer relief pressing her to her knees. The sickness, the bile, the unnatural tension that plagued her since stepping foot in the tower lifted like a sheet, leaving her raw in their absence. Idah watched her collapse, troubled eyes scanning Oria's face for signs of things she could not guess at. Slowly, the wizard nodded to herself, retrieving her tea and settling on the footstool beside where Oria knelt.
You are well attuned to magic, I think,
Idah said, tone conversational.
You would have made an excellent mage, or a child if it came to that.
She sipped her tea, passing Oria her own cup as the girl's hand stopped shaking.
Now that we are alone, why did you come?
Idah kept her voice gentle, but Oria could sense the urgency beneath it. Oria stammered, stopping herself when the syllable proved too troublesome. Idah watched silently as Oria sipped her tea, eyes closed and breathing deeply. She mastered herself and began again. I wanted to know if there was a way to avoid having babies. One that wouldn't mean picking up herbs at the church.
I see. Not as keen to be married as your father is to marry you, eh?
Oria's eyes shot to Idah's, wide and red-rimmed. Her heart hammered in her chest just shy of painful as she wondered how the wizard had known. Replaying Idah's words in her mind, she realized what Idah meant, and Oria stared instead at the cup in her hands. She shook her head. I want to be a child of the family. That's all. Oria lied into her tea. When no response came, Oria glanced up to see if Idah had fallen asleep in her chair. It wouldn't have been the first time. Instead, she found the wizard scrutinizing her like a puzzle to be solved, her brow knitted together. What's going on, Oria? Idah asked. Seeing the look on Oria's face, she added, You're afraid, and someone was watching you. What's going on? Idah couldn't bring herself to look Idah in the eye, or to lie to the old woman. She rested her teacup on the carpet in front of her, careful not to spill the dregs. It would have been nice to trust someone, but there were more people than just herself at risk. The servants would suffer if she told anyone. and family only knows what havoc Sister Moon would wreak on Idah herself. Still, to have someone, especially an adult, on her side, to have advice on how to avoid the fate her father planned for her, to sidestep the very will of a god, would have been everything Oria could have ever wished for. But then, she'd never be a child if she worked against the gods directly. A flutter of color caught Oria's eye from one of the floor-to-ceiling shelves that lined the interior walls of Idah's study. A jar waited there, large enough to fit her head and shoulders inside. A butterfly flapped its iridescent blue wings in a frenzy, trying to escape. It was missing a large piece of one wing, a coin-sized portion cleanly cut from it. "Do you know who's spying on you?" Idah pushed, setting her own cup beside Oria's, interlacing her fingers on her lap. "I only want to know a way to avoid having children," Oria evaded, watching the butterfly slowly destroy itself against its prison. "I appreciate that you want to help, but the rest is not your concern." Idah blew a long breath from her nose, tapping her teeth together in frustration. Shaking her head, she collected both sets of cups and stood, placing them on the side table for a servant to remove later. Her joints creaked as she moved. "Oria, if someone is using magic in Midormere, and especially if they're using it against an heir to the throne, then that is my concern. In fact, that's my job description. But I can't help you if you don't talk to me." "I'm not a direct heir. I don't go to war meetings or have any information that could hurt the Empire. What's happening isn't a threat to the throne." "Just to me," Oria added, mentally. "You shouldn't get involved." There was no force on the plains that could stand against a god, except perhaps another god or one of the chosen. Oria liked Idah, and the idea of the wizard getting hurt, of it being her crocheted slippers disappearing into the chapel instead of the crusty feet of another urchin, put an unpleasant taste in Oria's mouth. Oria stood, moving as if to remove the ring, then pausing, fingers wrapped around the cool metal. "Can you tell me how to avoid children, or not?" she said, matter of fact. "Not really," Idah shrugged, looking suddenly wrung out. "There are amulets, but it wouldn't take much for someone to suspect that if it's the only thing you're wearing. Otherwise, it would be a spell that would make you completely barren, with no chance to change your mind later, and I won't cast that unless you tell me more." "I see," Oria murmured. She took a deep breath as she removed the ring, but nothing changed. No wave of negative energy tried to sweep her off her feet. Oria handed the ring back to Idah, who hesitated before taking it. There was no assault when it left Oria's skin. Perhaps she'd imagined it the first time. Oria walked to the door, pausing as she reached it, remembering the spell that was cast as they entered. She glanced back at the exhausted wizard in her overstuffed chair, and the old lady returned her look with sad eyes. For a moment, Oria wanted to rush across the room and hug Idah, to take and give comfort to the fierce woman wilting before her. But she didn't. If she allowed herself to, she knew her resolve would crumble and all of her secrets would spill out, betraying the wishes of a goddess and the efforts of her father. "Oria, even if you can't talk to me, talk to someone. You're not an adult yet. You don't have to deal with things on your own." Idah exhaled the words like a sighing set of pipes. "Thank you, Idah. I'll do that," Oria lied, and the old lady nodded, jowls disappearing into her chest. "Then you may go. The jinx was to keep people out, not to keep you in." Oria pushed the door open, shivering as the cooler stairwell air brushed her skin. She didn't say goodbye as she gently closed the door behind her. Halfway down the spiral staircase, as far as she was likely to get from another living soul in the busy castle, Oria slid down the wall and wept. That was my favorite chapter from The Ghost of Midormere, available for sale on Amazon, or the special edition is currently available on Kickstarter, but once it's done on Kickstarter and the hard copies show up, it'll be available at zenuaplatin.ca. Thanks so much, and take care.